Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Velero Community Meeting / Open Discussions. Today is February 25th, 2020, and per usual, we get a bunch of stuff that we want to cover. If you want to add anything to the agenda, please do so. I'm going to share it in the chat here. And I will also share my screen so you all can see the agenda as we talk about it. Let me just do that. And all right. So first up, per usual, we get a bunch of status updates. Steve, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Last week I was on community support. Definitely kept me busy. There were lots of issues to catch up on and Slack conversations going on, so that took up a good chunk of my time. Anyway, yesterday we finally got the last fix merged for the 1.3 second beta. So we had discovered an additional issue around CRD backup and restore. So Nolan got that fix done and we merged that. So I was able to push out the second beta for 1.3. So that's out there now. The images and the release are published. So if anyone has a chance, please take it for a spin. Send us any feedback. Hopefully at this point, we don't discover any more critical issues and we can move to shipping the official 1.3 release before too long. And then just spent some time yesterday updating the blog post to account for the additional CRD fix, since the blog post does go into some depth on the set of CRD issues that we resolved. So that's mainly it for me. It was a little bit of a scattered past few days with support.
So do we have a tentative date for the 1.3 now?
I don't have a specific date in mind, but probably next week. I mean, if we don't get any issues reported, I'd say we could push it out next, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday. I did a little bit of testing yesterday and things looked good. I tested the specific bug around CRDs and that looked good. And we haven't really gotten any other issue reports from the first beta. So yeah, I'd say early next week would be a target.
Sounds good. All right, next up, Carlisia.
All right, I'm going to start from the second bullet. So I am caught up with the PRs that requested my reviews, but there are a bunch of other PRs on especially the helm repo that I want to go over and make sure they are good to go or not. And also some Velero PRs that I don't think that might not have requested my reviews, but I just want to look at them. Same thing with issues. There are a bunch of them. Just want to go over and give feedback. And next week I'm on PTO. So going back to the first bullet, I made slow progress with the CLI design and proof of concept. I am actually stuck on getting Minio, the connection with Minio to work, because what I'm doing is I need to make sure that things get deployed incrementally. So I'm doing that manually, and then I'm going to do it with customize. So after this meeting, if somebody has bandwidth to it should be quick, because this is like so bread and butter, but I can't figure out why I'm not connecting to menu. That's it for me.
I can help you out after the meeting.
Awesome, thank you.
Any questions, comments for Carlisia? All right, moving over to Nolan.
Like Steve mentioned, got the PR 2264 finished. Thank you, Genting Xiao, for finding that. That took a little bit longer because I wanted to test it. Once we picked up an approach, I wanted to test it and make sure Kubernetes versions 1.15 through 1.17 worked as expected. The tail end of last week was going through Ashish's PR for updates to the CSI prototype which he'll talk about. Also found out last week that I will be going to KubeCon EU. So if you're there, come say hi. I won't be doing a talk or anything, but I will be hanging out at the VMware booth at some point. And I also saw a couple hours ago that they're close to selling out. So if you're not going yet, but you're interested, you may want to go get tickets.
And actually, more importantly, if you are going, sign up also for the Contributor Summit. So that way you can get to attend the nightly event before the conference starts, as well as some of the day zero events.
Yep. I need to do that myself too. And then something that has been on my radar, but I haven't actually followed up on it, is something that Scott Sego reported, something I bubbled up upstream. There's this conversion issue with CRDs, and I got feedback from, I think his name's Jason or John Liggett, that it may not be a problem.
That's Jordan Liggett.
Jordan. Okay.
Yeah, he's a security / API guru at Kubernetes.
Yeah. He wasn't totally convinced it's where this is where it should be fixed, but I need to reply back to him because my demo repo was with just like straight YAML, but the actual problem that Velero sees is it's with the YAML that comes back, or JSON that comes back from the Kubernetes server, which seems wrong. So I need to get a more detailed response back to him. But it's been a little while, so I need to go refresh my memory on this. And I think Jenny Buckley, from what I had looked around on, she was doing a lot of the work around this area of the code. So I'm not surprised that they assigned her there. But given I hadn't done a lot of activity, I wouldn't be surprised if this gets marked stale soon. So I need to go update that. But I saw Scott was on the call, and that reminded me I had let this slip, so I need to circle back to that. I think that's most of my update for this week. So, yeah.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Nolan? I'll be at KubeCon EU as well, so maybe we could do a smaller version of the community lunch somewhere as well, Nolan. All right, next up, Ashish.
I have been working on like the CSI integration into Velero plugin for CSI. So I got the restore part of the restore functionality working, and that was kind of demoed internally to the team. We will shortly have like a community demo in a few weeks for folks who are interested. There is a link to the PR that you may want to look at. I don't think that has gotten merged yet, but it is close to getting merged. And then I am kind of continuing work on that, picking up on like the restore flow, trying to kind of walk through the design that we have right now and kind of make sure that it works, and then also implement that. That is what I will be up to this week, apart from being on community support. So I'm not sure how much time I'm going to be having to spend on the CSI stuff. And apart from that, I also wanted to get started on like a blog post for setting up an environment or a cluster that is able to use the CSI APIs that was made beta in 1.17. So that is also something that I'm planning to do this week. So that's my list.
Awesome. And you wanted to do a demo of this?
Not today, but shortly, once we have like more functionality built in. Right now, we just have like a backup flow implemented, which is not super interesting.
Sounds good. Yeah. Just make a note whenever you feel like doing a demo, and we'll do that.
Yep.
Awesome. Any comments for Ashish?
Hi, Ashish. This is Yun Chen. I'm quite interested about the CSI plugin for Velero. So I'd like to make sure that you mentioned, so right now you are working on the backup process of it, right? So it's already done, or?
I am working on like the restore flow. The backup part is kind of done, or yeah, almost done. So I can answer questions if you have any.
No. I mean, so next time when you do the demo, you can do both the backup and the restore.
Yes.
Right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the idea. I just didn't want to show part of the picture. I wanted to have both sides implemented so that if we have, like, if there are any bugs in our backup flow, we kind of catch it and fix it and then demo it instead of demoing something that may not
be
how it will actually work.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Anything else for Ashish? All right, moving over to discussion topics. Dylan, you got 2 topics today. So you get to pick which one you want to start with.
Real quick, I'll just give a brief update on the custom CA bundle thing. Steve left me some good feedback on the way that Velero currently handles the Rustic repository credentials and how that's inserted into the pod of Rustic. And I was actually able to confirm that I could do the same thing with the CA bundle and then execute a command with the CA cert flag to Rustic. So I updated the design this morning just with a couple paragraphs explaining this approach and linking to the Rustic repository code. So if you guys don't mind just taking a quick look at that, and then I'm hoping, I'm not sure how long this is going to take me, but I need to clean up the code that I hacked together to just test if this actually was going to function. And then I'd like to figure out where exactly in the Velero code that's going to go. I don't know if that should go in this doc, or if this is more of just like a, this is the general approach, and that's when you want to merge it. But either way, I just need to really know what the next step you guys think I should do. If this should get merged, or should we include all that information on this doc? But either way, whenever you guys get a chance, just take a look at that. Any questions about that before I move on to the other one?
Dylan, if I remember, though, there was still kind of an open question around on the client side how the certs are used. Yeah, this thread here, I think. Did you have any more thoughts on this, or have we decided on an approach here?
Yeah, so I actually thank you for reminding me. I had a question about the logs that are retrieved when I run like a Velero logs command, because I don't have a ton of familiarity with that. Do we need like specific access? I'm assuming obviously we grab all the information from the S3 bucket directly in some instances, right? So the intention here is that, do we see value in actually installing this custom cert for the backup storage location on the client's actual machine? I wasn't initially envisioning doing that, but mainly because I didn't see that necessarily as what the CLI tool was used for. But I'm also kind of outside and removed from where you guys see that CLI tool developing. So I'm kind of indifferent. If you guys think that fits in this design, I'm happy to add that into the design doc, because that wouldn't be too hard of a change.
Okay, so I know we had, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, we had someone contribute a PR to allow the insecure skip verify flag. And as part of that, there was some discussion around impact on the CLI for these commands. I'll have to go refresh because I don't remember all the details, but I'll just update with any comments I have on the PR for you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and just to follow up on there, like for for most of the client stuff, like the logs, the backup download, and now the details, is it describe details? I think those commands, they use a one-time use URL from the object store. So usually they say, hey, S3, give me a URL that's good for one use to download from here. And what the issue I link to is the user is like, hey, my resource list, when I do backup describe, the resource list is just garbled text. And they're using Minio on-prem. And if you change the BSL, or if we have them change the BSL to have a public URL, then it's resolved just fine. And they can grab their resources in plain text. But if they want to, have secure communications, they need some CA cert to grab that information.
Right.
So I think if we're doing custom CA support, I think it makes sense to have CA support for the client side to do these downloads too. I don't know about doing full on like Velero installs the cert on every possible OS, because
right.
That
was kind of my concern was where do you kind of cut this off?
Right. My opinion is we would just allow a flag that we say -- cert or whatever, and you point it. But
okay.
That's my opinion, and that's easily documented. And that I think is acceptable, and maybe we allow that as a config in the client config. So like the client, I think it's in home.config/velero, and you could set a flag for the CA cert there, so that you don't have to specify it every time for people that use
okay.
So I think that's a good middle ground between installing it in the guest or in the client side OS and not making users specify it all the time.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. I will add these notes to the doc, and should have that done the next hour or so. I'll just wrap that up right now. So thank you for that. Unless you guys have anything else, the other thing that I wanted to bring up was this issue that's actually been open for a while, and I remember I commented on it a few months ago. And it has to deal with Rustic Volumes not being restored. Specifically, it was reported because they were using OpenShift with deployment configs. And we did confirm this a long time ago, me and Scott, but we kind of had a workaround with the way that we were leveraging Velero that I didn't really see as a big deal. But I really want to come back and learn more exactly about why this was happening and why this doesn't happen with other resources like deployments. And I have some information, and I don't want to necessarily waste too much time here, but I was hoping that at least we could bring it up here and then maybe take this offline. I wanted to learn that basically the root of what's occurring here is when the pod is restored on the pod is restored, then the deployment config is also restored. And when it's running through the init container to run the Rustic restore, it's kind of like a race condition where the deployment config can sometimes wipe out the original pod and bring up a new one without it. So the solution that was mentioned in this issue was to put the annotation in the pod template spec. And that does work. But it is kind of weird to me that you don't have to do that with deployments. It would seem that you would have to do that unless Velero was waiting for the Rustic restore to finish prior to moving on to other resources, which I don't believe is occurring. So that's kind of a lot. I just wanted to mention that I'd be interested in speaking to someone to learn more about this, someone that kind of understands the Rustic restore process. maybe we can sync up offline if you guys think that makes more sense. But
yeah, I can definitely connect with you. I kind of somewhat remember this issue, though it's been a few months. And yeah, I think the assumption that we're making in our code is that if we restore the pod first, that when we go to restore, a replica set or a deployment, that replica set or deployment will basically adopt the pod that we've already created. And that seems to have been working pretty consistently. So yeah, I'm also not totally clear on why there is the diff between what we see with plain vanilla replica sets or deployments versus the deployment configs.
Yeah.
But I can definitely connect with you.
Yeah, and I just was going to mention a related issue because this, and that was one of the questions here when you're restoring something like that is that one other workaround that we've done, not for Rustic but in general, is if you're restoring a deployment with pods, one option is to not restore the pod, just to restore the deployment and have the deployment create the pod to match its replicas. And the reason I started doing that was I ran into issues with certain resources. I think, and I can't remember whether this was daemon sets or this was jobs, but there was one where I remember when you restored the pod and the owner of the pod, the owner references were doing something weird in some cases where you'd end up with a new pod being created by the daemon set, or again, the job. I don't remember which type it was that was doing this. But because the owner references were being a little weird with that one resource, it wasn't deleting the old one, and you end up with two pods running. And so the kind of big hammer workaround was let's just not restore pods that have owners that are maintaining them. Again, I don't know what the normal process is here. It's kind of related to what Dylan was talking about, but just in general, this question of what's on the pod versus what's on the owner of the pod, and how do those get managed and restored in a way that's sane.
Steve, didn't we early on, like 0405, didn't Velero at one point just restore deployments, and we didn't restore pods directly, we've let whatever owned them restore them, and then about the time we brought Rustic around, we started restoring the pods directly. Is my memory correct there?
Yeah, I think it was for even longer than 0405. I think up until maybe like 0.11, we weren't restoring anything that had a controller owner. So pods weren't getting restored, and if you had replica sets owned by deployment, we just restore the deployment and let the API server logic go from there. And there was a user request that led to us making that change. But when we introduced Rustic, we did, we had an exception for Rustic where we directly restored the pods so that we could put the init container in place on the individual pod with the relevant Rustic backup ID, I guess. So just quickly, Dylan and Scott, you both mentioned putting the annotation on the pod template spec. Which annotation is that?
The Rustic annotation.
The one that says
this tells Rustic which volumes to copy or to yeah. Dylan, do you remember I forget the exact migrate, but it's the annotation that tells Velero Rustic should handle this rather than snapshotting.
Mm-hmm.
Backup volumes, I think, velero.io/backup volumes.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason, again, for that goes back to this issue of when we were restoring the deployment, what's happening with the deployment config, at least, and this is where, we're saying it's not happening, doesn't seem to be happening with deployments, but with deployment configs in particular, Velero restores the pod, and then it goes to restore the deployment config. The deployment config, because it has a trigger where the config changes, it launches a new pod. And so what we were seeing is that the initial pod that Velero restored is immediately then deleted because the deployment config upon restore sees, oh, I have this is a changed resource. It's new. I need to deploy a new one. It gets the next generation, and then that's created, and the original pod is deleted. And so then we don't have that annotation anymore. Putting the annotation on the template spec seems to resolve that, but we're concerned there's still a race condition there, because if Rustic starts to restore using that initial pod and then the deployment config overwrites that with a new pod, I'm not sure Rustic is going to recover from that or not, or if Rustic's going to see it didn't finish and then work anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like you would run into issues there. And so, yeah, I mean, there must be some diff in the logic between, what replica sets are doing as far as adopting pods versus spinning up new ones, and what's going on in the deployment config.
And I think it's actually adopting the pod, but I think what's happening is that it does adopt the pod, but then the trigger, the config change trigger on the deployment config is triggering, saying, oh, we now have a change in this configuration. We need to deploy a new application, controller, a new pod. And so it is adopting the pod, but then immediately it's getting deleted with a new pod taking its place.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, again, with deployments, you'd think something similar would happen, because if you go and edit a deployment, change the configuration, it will launch a new pod. But that's not happening. I don't know if there's something in the restore logic that's waiting for Velero or waiting for Rustic to finish before going on and restoring the deployment. Because if that were to happen here with the deployment config, that would solve the problem too. If the deployment config, if the pod gets restored via Rustic gets finished before we restore the deployment config, then we don't care that it overwrites it with a new one, because Rustic's already done, the file system's been updated. But I don't know if there's a difference in either on the restore side, whether Velero is restoring deployments differently than deployment configs here, or on the Kubernetes side, if the triggers are working differently.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not waiting for the Rustic restore to finish. What's worked for us is create the pod, start the Rustic restore, and then from there you can go create the replica sets and deployments and everything.
So if something else were to trigger the deployment to launch a new pod before Rustic was done, you have the same problem with deployments.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm happy to keep digging into that, try and sort of understand the behavior, and then we can brainstorm, approaches to making it work well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Right. I think that was the last of the discussion topics that we had on the agenda. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before we dive into the contributor shoutouts? All right. So today we only have one. Steve, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I just had one from the main Velero repo. So Genting, who's been a contributor in the past, had another PR up to, there's a bug with related to Rustic backups of persistent volume claims, where if you had multiple backup storage locations configured, it wasn't always looking at the correct backup storage location when trying to figure out what the Rustic snapshot's parent was. And I don't remember if this was resulting in just errors or if there was a panic that was happening. In any case, Genting fixed the bug. Thanks a lot for the fix. And I do know Genting's been active in the Helm repo as well, with some PRs there to bring the Helm chart in line with the Velero install behavior. So another shout out for those. And I don't know if there were any other PRs that we wanted to call out from Helm. I did not pull them, but if anyone knows, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, we haven't been doing shout out. We haven't been doing a good job at giving a shout out to people who have been contributing to our Helm charts, but we'll change that. We'll do better. But all of those PRs, they're closed and with a green check mark. They are all by outside contributors. It was since we changed our chart to our own repo, I noticed that people jumped in and fixed a lot of little things. So I think it was, our chart was really stale when it was at the, in the Helm organization.
That's really good to see. Awesome. And yeah, we'll make sure that we do proper shout outs for all the Helm charts as well going forward. Does anyone have any last items that they want to add to the meeting today? All right, then we are done for today. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week, and see you all next week. Bye, everyone.